Hello, ESLA members and potential ESLA members. Today, you're watching the second in a series of interviews with people who have insights into important aspects of the waters and shorelines of Elk and Skegemog Lakes and the Torch and Lower Rapid Rivers. Our guest is Mark Stone, Antrim County's Drain Commissioner and operator of dams since 1997. He has responsibility for the maintenance of the two dams the county owns at Elk Rapids and Bellaire. Mark has been addressing concerns about high water and flooding, especially in the upper part of our watershed, and recently led the charge to convince the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and Antrim County Commissioners to commit to spending nearly $400,000 last year and this to conduct a hydrological study of the entire watershed that he hopes identifies problem spots and leads ultimately to solutions. Mark also addresses how the increasing frequency of intense short period rainstorms has led to increased soil erosion into our waters. Welcome, Mark Stone.
Well, thanks for the invitation. It's always great to speak to the ESLA folks. It's been a very, very busy year. And when I sat down to put my notes together yesterday for this, I realized that how eventful it was. But I'm going to kind of race through stuff because I want you folks to be able to ask a lot of questions. I'm going to start with an update on what's going on at the hydro. I don't know how many of you folks were able to attend, but we had that open house last summer. And that was phenomenally successful. I believe that we counted 700 people that went through the dam in that day. We opened it at 10 and closed up at 6. And the Stockhausens and I never even had a time for a break. Everybody got a tour if they wanted it. And we also had a little presentation. So the feedback on it was so positive that I think it's something that we should do again. And just to throw it out to ESLA, you know, if you wanted to co-sponsor an open house like that, I'd be happy to work that out with you to maybe use it as sort of a member event or something like that for recruiting. But in any case, it was really a great event. And so we've been on pins and needles about getting the new purchase agreement for the power down there. Stockhausens have been part of a group that is that organized themselves literally, I think it's been 4 years now, in order to lobby both the legislature and the MPSC to force consumers to the table, because consumers wouldn't even talk to them, and they threw out a really lowball figure on the per kilowatt price. So believe it or not, this group spent a couple $100,000 over the course of that time in lawyer fees and so on. But they finally did get a signed contract earlier this year. It wasn't what they had hoped for on the high end, but at least it was good enough for that. Now they've got a really secure, you know, next, I think it's a 7 to 10 year contract, and that puts them in good, strong financial shape, which of course puts the whole facility into good financial shape going forward. But it's interesting how many facets there is to running that hydroelectric plant. You know, you've got all the technical stuff, but then you've got all the political stuff that we went through for the licensing. And then, you know, it's still a business proposition, and it's pretty hard to sell that power because there's a real limited amount of people that can buy it from us. But, switching over to Bellaire, give you a little update on the Bellaire Dam. This late last year, the board approved to allow me to hire an assistant. The way that this happened was I could not find a vendor that could economically rebuild the dam gates, the radial gates over there on the Bellaire Dam, because any guys that wanted to do the work couldn't get workers' comp in order to be covered when they're working on a county facility. And so I was able to locate a gentleman who introduced himself to me. He's a recently retired hydroelectric dam operator from Washington State, has decades of experience on this kind of work, and the guy knows how to do everything on this dam. I mean, the first couple of hours I spent down with them there with him, I think I learned as much about the innards of all of these controls and the equipment than I'd learned in the last 20 years. Because I've always had vendors come in to do repairs and so on, and now we're doing them ourselves. It's not a big deal because I only got $2,000 from the county, so that's not going to account, not going to add up to a whole lot of hours. But he and I are rebuilding the radial gates and changing the seals and all that stuff ourselves, and I'm really excited to have him. His name is Scott Kleinhuisen. He lives up in the Central Lake area, and he'll be also available to help me with projects at the Elk Rapids Hydro if the need ever arises there. So we're slowly kind of building a technical staff now at the county around these dams, which is really important to me to have a backup. Now I've got somebody legitimate besides my kids, that I can call to go have them open a gate. So I can't tell you what a game changer it is for me to have this lake level committee. I've been doing this a long time now. I started with the running the dams in '97. And I have to say that this is the first issue that has really come along that has galvanized interest in the entire watershed. And this is very hopeful to me because something that we have lacked all these years is an attention of the riparians and the residents to looking at the entire watershed when we talk about management issues. And maybe this is what it took, but I see the nucleus now in us really maybe getting the wind in our sails about the future of the chain of lakes in a much broader way. On that Zoom meeting yesterday, interestingly, a couple of the commissioners voiced the opinion that it was time for the county to step up and take more of a leadership role in these management issues, understanding that when the hydrology study is done, the next phase is going to be the problem solving. And I have a feeling that some of the solutions to these problems are going to be expensive. And so that will take leadership. And even though the townships are going to have a stake in this thing, none of the townships span the whole lake chain. And even the county doesn't really span the whole lake chain because you've got portions of it in other counties. But that's very hopeful to me that the Board of Commissioners is starting to realize that this is that the chain of lakes is a resource that really requires some proactive government. Because reactive government with these issues the problems are already going to be really bad by the time we react. So, okay, last thing you guys requested that I discuss a little bit about the comparisons of our dams to what happened down in Wixom Lake and Midland. And I have gotten a lot of contact on this issue. Actually, probably, I'd say that I got at least a half a dozen individual people that wanted to talk to me about it. Most of them had some connection to what happened down there. But there are some really significant differences between our situation and theirs. And if you saw the videos of the collapse of the dam itself, the upper dam, that earthen embankment breaking loose, So we do not have a dam equivalent to that. That dam had, probably 30 or 40 feet of head right up against the impoundment structure. That's a huge amount of pressure. The impoundment structures that support our dams, both in Bellaire and in Elk Rapids, are maybe 5 feet at the most. You've got in Elk Rapids, the impoundment is not that long. It's basically Dexter Street. So from at the point where the upper basin of Elk Lake meets Dexter Street by the downtown, and that arc as it comes around to where the Beck mustard plant used to be, and then to the actual proper of the hydro dam power plant, that is nowhere near the kind of pressure. So now the other thing is that the operator was very problematic. I actually knew this guy a little bit, and he had a lot of bravado, and he was part of the whole, no, don't regulate me. We know what we're doing. We don't need any government. And that led to exactly the same relationship with FERC that Traverse City Light and Power ended up with. They just get in it with each other, and some bad attitude. We've got an excellent relationship with the regulators. Our Bellaire Dam gets inspected on a 3-year cycle. The inspectors always give us great marks for the condition of the dam. The hydro plant gets inspected. That's DEQ in Bellaire. FERC inspects our hydro on an annual basis. They send an engineer up here. This year they did a virtual thing, because of COVID, but that was partly because we have such a strong record already. When you look at the capacities, the hydro dam in Elk Rapids, our capacity is so great that if we opened all 4 of those wells, and we could even pull the stop logs at the kids' fishing pond, that would actually drop the water in the upper harbor, because that's how much capacity we have. Essentially, the water would be balled up behind the US 31 bridge, before it was balled up behind the impoundment. And we just can move the water so much faster. In the dam down at Wixom, that guy was actually set up under his full capacity because he had lost the right to be able to generate electricity. And so when the turbines are freewheeling like that to pass water, they don't pass as much water. And so it was ironically, losing his FERC license made it more dangerous for him to be even operating that dam. I'm surprised that they didn't order him to take the water level down when he had to forfeit his license, because they have a lot of power before they take your license away to call all the terms on how you exit your relationship with them. It's just so sad. The same thing with the Bellaire Dam. Now, Bellaire Dam is a Hazard 3 dam. It's more dangerous than Elk Rapids because if there was a collapse of the dam, that you've got some occupied dwellings that are inside the floodplain in a catastrophic failure of that dam. But again, it's a very different setup because the water from Intermediate Lake has got to come down a mile distance from Intermediate Lake. So it's slowing down the whole way as it approaches the dam. When I have all the gates open, even in a rainstorm, I'm draining the lower part of Intermediate River from the dam about up to the boundary of the village. because of the sediment that is built up in the intermediate river above that point. And one of the things that we're going to do with the hydrology study is we're going to model a collapse of the Bellaire Dam to figure out, what it would take in terms of a rainstorm in order to actually put that dam into danger. There's no dam that can't fail. I don't want to tell you that it's not going to happen, because I'll be proven wrong, certainly, at some point. But I'd say that the likelihood is extremely remote in compared to what happened in Wixom. Keep in mind, too, from the life-threatening point of it, is that what happened at Wixom was an immediate release of essentially the whole reservoir because of the size of the area in the impoundment that collapsed. So you had this wave of water move downstream and inundating everything in its path. We don't have those kinds of reservoirs that are behind our dam. If the dam was to fail in Elk Rapids, first of all, the water is just going to go into Lake Michigan. But secondly, there's essentially a backup at the bridge, the US 31 bridge. So it's not as though a huge portion of the impoundment collapses and then 90% of the volume of Elk Lake is going to dump out of the lake as quickly as what happened at Wixom. It was a very, very short period of time. The entire reservoir was on its way downstream. That wouldn't even happen in Bellaire, because all of the water would still have to fit through the river on its way down to get to Lake Bellaire. And then, it's hitting a bigger reservoir in Lake Bellaire. So yes, Lake Bellaire would go up considerably, but then there would be a reservoir effect, and then it would hold water while the water started to move down Grass River. But as I said, I'll be able to give you the details on this when the hydrology study is done, because the hydrology study will actually show you in real time what happens to the levels in the lakes under these different scenarios. Because we'll be able to run, say, a 5-inch rainstorm and show you what happens in the lakes, how quickly the levels come up, how high they come up. And so it'll be extremely informative. And then it's all hooked into a GIS mapping system so that you can visually see exactly what these effects are as they're happening in real time. So with that, I think I'll conclude my presentation.
Mary Beth, jump in.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to say thanks for joining us today on behalf of all of us. That all the information that you've updated us on has been very interesting. And one of my first questions was going to be about the status of our dams. So thank you for addressing that as well, because I think that's in everyone's mind, since there are several along our chain that could drastically affect, what we call home here. So that was very interesting. You hinted at climate change and how it's affecting the area. I'm wondering if you're seeing more overall annual rainfall, or is it more a pattern in the rainfall that we're getting that's affecting and kind of pushing us to do this hydrology study and get information about where the water goes?
Yeah, well, this all started around 2011, and I believe that at the time, I think it was 2011, was the most amount of rain that had ever been recorded in the state of Michigan. And since then, there's been enough rain to keep all the levels high. And so it's not just in our chain, it's all of northern Michigan for sure. And then I don't follow the lower part of the peninsula as much, so I can't really comment on that. But so we have more volume. But what I find more disturbing is the fact that these high intensity rainstorms are now much more frequent. So for instance, if you go online and you look up NOAA's National Climate Assessment, they break down their assessment of the United States into regions. And so like Northwest Michigan is part of the Midwest Great Lakes region. And I believe, I'll probably get this a little bit wrong, but I believe that the increase in the frequency of what they classify as high intensity rainstorms is 37%. So that's really significant because these are the storms where you get a lot of rain, say, in an hour as opposed to being soaked in over 6 hours. And those are the ones that produce stormwater. And stormwater is what causes the flooding. If you get a nice gradual soaking, a heck of a lot of that ends up soaking into the soil in this region because of the soil types that we have. Now, what I found really interesting about that when I found that in the National Climate Assessment is I looked at the data sets that was based on, and they ended at 2000. Okay, so when the new climate assessment comes out, which is what FEMA will be using, all of these things that have happened in the last 20 years now will now be factored in. So if the increase was 37% in the data set up to that point, you can imagine that what we could be is at the inside of a hockey stick curve. And that gets really scary. So there's definitely change out there. It's quantified now, and it's pretty hard for people to debate. I don't get into it's not my policy making about how to remedy it. So I don't get into the causes, whether it's man caused or not, when I'm dealing with the public. I am personally convinced that it is, but and that we have to take some measures. But now even if we started to take measures as a country or as a world population, we're still decades away from any solution because that carbon dioxide is already in the atmosphere. It's not going to go out of the atmosphere. But in any case, that's what we're seeing. And there's no one that I talk to at the Army Corps, at NOAA, or the USGS people that I deal with. They all just assume this now, that this is life going forward.
And the other thing I wanted to clarify was you mentioned that FEMA's looking at the floodplain analysis, and they're going to base it on the Army Corps' study around here, much of which is Antrim County, but ESLA encompasses also Grand Traverse and parts of Kalkaska counties. And certainly a big portion of it for us is Rapid River and what would flooding or that occur in that area. I'm assuming that Army Corps report will also reflect those areas when reporting into FEMA for townships outside of Antrim County?
Yeah, well, okay. FEMA operates on a county by county basis.
Right.
So all of the discussion I had with them so far is only about Antrim County, and I honestly don't know if Kalkaska and Grand Traverse counties are also figured in on the same timeline. Chances are they probably are. It would make sense for the hydrologists to be working on those at the same time. What the Army Corps model will give us an idea on the tributaries, just to take an example, say Rapid River. The modeling of the Army Corps on the Rapid River is only going to go up to the bridge at Rapid City.
Oh, the Arwood Bridge.
No, the next one, the one that is on, Rapid City Road, is that what it's called?
At Freedom Park, I believe.
There's a park up there, exactly. Yep. Okay, so the Rapid River above that, the 100-year floodplains for that portion of the river, we won't know until 2023 because that's not in the scope of the hydrology project. So, and that goes for all of the tributaries as well, say like a Spencer Creek, because those little tributaries are part of our study, but we're not doing any predictive work on those kinds of tributaries. You know, this is a huge study. Army Corps, the hydrologists that I talked to said the The only watershed system that they've done on this scale is the Great Lakes.
Hmm.
So nobody's ever done this, say, on the inland waterway watershed, that lake chain.
Mm-hmm.
And I think our lake chain might be a little more complicated because of all the overlapping jurisdictions. You know, this is something that we're going to have to tackle if it comes out of this hydrology study that we have got a couple of big public projects. Then, of course, the conversation, the debate is going to move to how do we fund them.
Right.
And that's going to, I can almost guarantee you that it's going to turn into a discussion about special assessment districts.
Right.
Now, one of the things that I've kind of, I have to say that as drain commissioner, I have been resistant about is forming a drainage district in the chain of lakes. And part of my thinking on this over the years has been drain commissioners that have big drainage districts get really political.
Mm.
And it attracts big money into the campaigns because it also with it comes the authority to be able to run sewers and water. And so it becomes, most drain commissioners in this state are engines of development, you could almost say. Now, on the other hand, I could see a lot of ways that having a drainage district in the lake chain could be very, very useful, you know, especially for, say, maintaining navigation or flood remediation and those kinds of issues. Maybe there's some hybrid way or some way that you can form that type of a district and maybe limit authority.
Right.
So it doesn't go crazy, you know, because you know, I mean, we all know that the development pressures are going to continue, and you know, it's the leading factor as far as the threat to the environmental and the quality and the water quality of the lakes.
Right. Let me change topics a little bit. This is probably a much more narrow topic, but with these big stormwater events and more of them happening more frequently, what's the coordination, or what's the cooperation, or what's the insight from the road commission on all this stuff? Because they're building all these roads and maintaining all these roads that go into the lakes, right?
Yeah. They've replaced a few culverts.
Yeah, well, that's what
you probably noticed.
You know, my impression is, and I'm not well informed, but they're kind of clueless as far as that goes. As far as the whole issue of stormwater management and drainage goes, maybe not. I don't know.
Well, unfortunately, well, okay, let me give you two examples that kind of contrast with each other. On the one hand, I can think of offhand at least 4 or 5 culverts that were complete washouts within the last 3 years.
Right.
You know, at least 3 of them around Torch Lake.
One of them up in Elk Rapids, I think, right?
Yep. Okay, so what happened was, you know, the road commission replaced it with a bigger culvert, you know, and then rebuilt the roadbed. You know, whatever, I don't know, I'm not privy to what the engineering was that went into the decision of what they ended up replacing the washout with. I honestly have never coordinated with them in that.
Mm-hmm.
When the hydrology study is turned in, how in October of 2021, I believe, how much time after that would it take for work to begin on remedying the flow?
Well, I imagine people have opinions right away, and that will, you know, the energy will be driven by that. Now, there's a whole other element to this that I should mention, and that is we are going to, the hydrology study is put together in public domain software. The HEC RAS and the HEC HMS software that I had mentioned earlier is all public domain. It's also basically an industry standard, so there's a lot of hydrologists out there that know how to work with that. The bulk of the work is doing all the necessary measurements in order to put it into the model. So when we receive the model, the Army Corps is essentially out of it. Their project is over. We now have this model. We're going to have a means by which that we manage the model, keep it updated, and as ideas come in and people say, well, let's try dredging this area, we're going to be responsible for being able to run those scenarios on that model. So it's going to be like a living document, except it's just a living software model. And at that point will be when the real work starts. And honestly, I wish I could predict how it's going to work. It's going to be tangled up in politics. It's going to be tangled up in the money issues and then the staging, because it'll be very important that if there are problems downstream, those get done first, even if they're not as critical to the people that live there as the ones that are upstream that need to be remedied. So this will be a bit of a tightrope act.
So the work will be incurred over time as politics and money will allow, basically, is what we're saying.
Yes, but what I'm hoping for is that at the same time we're forming a group of very smart and dedicated people that are not going to let this thing sit.
Sure.
And it remains to be seen whether, like personally, I need the county board to step up and take this on because I'm an employee of the county. So, for me to be a continuous part of this effort is going to require the Board of Commissioners to say, yeah, we're going to contribute stones, time, and we're going to help with some funding for this thing. And, but at the same time, the statutes are very clear that a lot of this stuff is going to fall back on townships, and it's also going to fall back on the DEQ because they're going to be the ones issuing permits. So they'll be essentially laying out the criteria about what's necessary in order to do anything on the water.
This kind of brings me around to my final question. Mark, this summer the Elk Rapids Dam has constantly kept its required reading of 590.8 above sea level feet, a credit to you and the Stockhausen family. But our heavier than normal spring rains, as we've discussed, seem to take some time to sweep through the dam, which we've also discussed. Can you elaborate on this, I won't say phenomenon, but on this to the Lake Skegemog and Elk Lake people who sometimes don't believe there's enough water flowing over the dam, in spite of not taking the reading themselves?
Yeah. Well, the capacity of the dam is such that we can move a lot of water and keep up with the climbing level when the water is coming into the system. So, for instance, a turbine can run at, turbines don't run at just a constant speed. They run at different speeds, and the different speeds are calibrated to the amount of water that's passing through the dam. And so that allows us to adjust the actual power generation to match what's coming into the lake and then keep the level fairly stable. If we can't do that with the turbines alone, then we can do it with the 2 extra bays where we can pass water through the dam. We don't get to make electricity out of it.
Right. I was thinking more of water and ebb and flow in the spring after the heavy rains. The water that seems to sort of stick around Elk and Skegemog for longer than people would expect, before it goes over the dam is what I meant
You mean
question.
around the fringes of the lake?
Yeah, the fringes of the lake and all that, you know. Yeah.
I think right now we're experiencing more of that because the soils are saturated for longer periods of time than what we're accustomed to. You know, the rain once the groundwater, the entry points to the groundwater are through these soils, and once they fill up the groundwater reservoir, they're sitting on the surface. And we've had such a constant supply of rain that now we're finding, like a great example of this. It's not right on Elk Lake, but on Dara Road, which runs on the far eastern part of the county. It's the road that connects from Mansalona down to M72. So it's kind of a shortcut. There's a couple of pothole ponds that are on both sides of that road. And they're a really good indicator of groundwater levels because there's no apparent surface exit out of them. And one of them is a little bit higher than the other one on the road. So when the groundwater gets really high, the pond is on the east side of the road, goes over the road, and the county has to close the road down. And you'd be surprised how many days in the last couple of years that main county road has been closed simply because of the fact that the groundwater level out there is so high and it's flooding these ponds. So that is a phenomenon that is going on everywhere right now. One of the things that people will notice is that there's a lot of trees dying in swampy areas where they weren't dying before. So we had the big raft of ashes that died. Now you're starting to see things like, you know, spruce trees that are dying and cedar trees that are dying. That, you know, that what's going on here? Well, what's going on is the water table in these ponds used to stay low enough that those trees could survive that area because they can handle intermittent flooding, but they can't handle having their roots underwater for 12 months straight. That's when they start to die. And so now the tamaracks are starting to go, and we're seeing this in a lot of the swamp areas that are a little higher in elevation than the lake, but the water is still balled up in there because of the wicking dynamic of water. It'll seek a higher elevation if it's got something to cling to, you know. So your water table you can dig a hole, and the water inside that hole will be a couple inches higher than what the lake is, even though they're only a couple 100 feet apart. That's because that water table is following the surface of the ground up as it goes away from the surface waters.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think that we've gotten a real great insights into a lot of the things going on. Mark, every county should have a drain commissioner. Director at dams is as responsible as you are, and who brings so much insight and so much hard work. So I think with that, we are going to end ESLA's second interview by Zoom with interesting people who have insights into our lakes. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.